Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Molly and Jerry. It's always a pleasure being part of the next digital events. And I'm joined today by Kenon Chen from Clear Capital. And Kenon has some really important topics. And I know that for many of us right now, everything relating to valuation is such a challenge. And so Kenon's going to bring up some really key conversations for us to talk about. But before I do that, Kenon, I'd like to invite you, welcome to the next community. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being here. I really appreciate it.
So one of the biggest things, like I know that there are three key areas we really want to dive into today, but this is such an important topic for all of us, is that rising cost of underwriting. And really, how do you control it? And that's been such a big thing for so many of us in the industry. So what would you advise? What does Clear Capital and what do you specifically have that you can share with us in that area?
Yeah, I mean, this has certainly been a big theme, I think, over the past year. I mean, my hat's off to the way that the industry and particularly lenders adapted to COVID, to remote work, to changing technology. I mean, it's been a pretty amazing year if you think about the flexibility and resilience that the industry has shown. But with that has come, of course, an incredible amount of demand and also I think a difficulty in finding labor, and so that's really increased the cost of underwriting, and then also technology. As much as I think people have been resilient, sometimes it's hard for technology to adapt, right, and be as flexible as we need it to be, to have all the right tools. And so what we've seen is that I think that folks that have had uh, a number of different tools, instead of one cohesive approach, disparate tools, that's been a challenge. It's been a challenge to remain efficient, and then it's also, of course, a challenge to adapt brand new tools. Like when you're in the heat of all the volume and trying to keep up, trying to implement a whole new system is a challenge as well. But what we're seeing is that there are some opportunities to take a little bit of a different approach to underwriting, to take more of a risk-based approach, and perhaps even segment out or break out collateral underwriting from credit. And as you get more specialized and have the right tools, there's an opportunity for efficiency.
You said some key words, and I know that every single one of us have felt this pain in the last year, especially labor shortage. And you mentioned the tools, and so you talk a little bit about breaking out credit and collateral underwriting. One of the things I will tell you, I know that I've experienced this, is this reluctance for people that previously had, they owned all of it. So if we had an underwriter and they were responsible for reviewing an appraisal. So can you tell me a little bit more about, how would that tool, so if you break it out and you have separate credit and collateral underwriting, what do you envision there? How would that work?
Yeah, so a lot has changed in the world of collateral underwriting. I mean, it definitely started by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right, with the automated underwriting tools. CU on the Fannie side and LCA on the Freddie side. Providing now additional scores, real results, an understanding of how they're looking at comparables. All those things have changed quite a bit in the past few years, but with multiple I think real results and feedback coming back from multiple places. How do you bring all that into one cohesive view so that you really understand, based on the risk of the file, what type of scope should be considered for the review? When do you dig deep and when do you stop, right, and not spend time, too much time on a file that doesn't warrant that? And so what we're seeing is that there's an opportunity to bring together, first of all, everything investors are saying, everything the automated underwriting systems are saying, but also an understanding of the property itself, an understanding of the market around it, and putting the right information in front of the underwriter so that the right amount of time is spent on the file.
I mean, efficiency is really, it's the number one, thing in the game. And so maybe what I'm hearing a little bit of is like, it's partly putting it in front of the underwriter, in a more cohesive manner. But would you also say that this is the type of process that maybe could be run parallel? So you could be doing, your credit path could be going one way and your collateral path could be going simultaneously, and they meet up at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we've seen the results of that for lenders that have taken more of that specialized approach, if you will, in parallel. We've seen huge time, being shaved off the process. We have one lender that has been able to cut their time in half. They were spending an average of about 45 minutes on the appraisal files, and with getting rep and warrant relief, when they've got the scores coming back from the GSEs, under 2.5, been able to cut that time down to 8 minutes for the review instead of 45. And then even when they don't get that rep and warrant relief, they're still able to cut the time down to 24 minutes instead of 45 minutes. So I think there's huge gains. And of course, when you're cutting down that time, that means less resource power that you're having to put at maintaining the whole pipeline.
Yeah. There's kind of one more topic maybe I'd like you to address before we move on to your next, and that's just how, some of the things right now that are so important to us are, using machine learning and using AI and those kinds of things. So what would you recommend, or what do you specify or say here could be really beneficial to an underwriter?
Yeah, there's huge promise in machine learning and photo AI. As we know, one of the hardest things to automate is reviewing the photos, right? Trying to understand, what's actually going on with the property from the photos that are in the appraisal. But we've seen, of course, with a lot of the advancement that's come out of Silicon Valley with photo recognition, computer vision, that those tools can be incorporated into the underwriting process. And we're already actually in beta with using photo AI right within our underwriting tool. So imagine, a world, if you will, in which appraisals that first of all just don't have the right photos matching up to the number of bedrooms, matching up to what's in the sketch. I mean, the things that we all know drive, unnecessary revision requests that have to go back and, hey, I don't have a photo for the third bedroom. That all should be able to be automated, and the technology is already here to do that. So that's what we see as a huge opportunity to not put a file in front of underwriter that should have never gotten to them, right? It's not ready yet for a human to review.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I think that if that were certainly incorporated into the pre-underwriting QC process, that definitely, I can imagine that would definitely improve the underwriter's overall use of time. So I know there's a couple more topics, and this one I know is going to be very important, and that's the one about talking about overvaluation and the risk that is associated there. And this market right now certainly has represented, challenges with valuation. So what are your thoughts in that area?
Well, certainly we've seen, unprecedented home price appreciation, right, over year. And some of that, of course, was driven by the pullback of the market, due to COVID, the initial shutdown last year. But still, we're seeing, 16 to 20% year over year appreciation, and of course, we're all hearing, stories in different markets of competitive bidding, over list. And so, the stat that just kind of jumped out at me in the past month is that 20% of appraisals now are coming in underneath the purchase contract price. And one of the challenges that we're hearing is that, you know, uh, having recent enough data, how does a lender have recent enough data to understand exactly what comps were on the market at the time that the appraisal was completed? And because those are being challenged now by borrowers that are concerned, oh no, it didn't meet my contract price, but what about this sale? But that sale wasn't on the market when the appraisal was done. So having recent data at your fingertips so that you really know what was available then is becoming a huge issue.
That's that's definitely been a problem. And first of all, people are writing their contracts above the list price to begin with, trying to land that deal. And when you talk about recency of data, what from a timing standpoint, because I know that's one of the big challenges in just data collection in general is the age of the data. So how current could that information be, or how much more relevant could it be? How do you make it more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, we found that a couple years ago that we were looking for that ourselves. We were seeing a lot of lag, even when you have access to public records data and MLS data to understand recent listings and sales. We were seeing just too long of a time between the data being in the market and it actually getting to us through a number of different ways that you could purchase that data, or it's being aggregated. So we went out and built our own relationships so that we could directly integrate to systems all over the country. So we now have 93% of all MLS data flowing in near real time to our systems. So within a couple hours, we're aware of things going on in the market, or things changing. And then that gets, of course, brought right into underwriting tools so that when the appraisal is being evaluated and scored, it really is looking at a representation of what the appraiser saw on the market. And we're hearing from lenders too that, that it's a concern from the GSEs as well. Hey, have you looked at, comps, to make sure that the most appropriate, comps are being selected. It's hard to do all that if you're not seeing what the appraiser saw.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to hear that you have almost live time data. And I think that's such a big thing because the market, especially in the last, 6 to 8 months, has moved so quickly. What was yesterday is not tomorrow. So that's really interesting to hear that an underwriter could actually have access to more recent data. And I think so one of the other things too that I'm curious about is how, so when we talk about data and we talk about usage and we talk about how we're going to leverage these different tools, one of the things that's a challenge for us, in the business side is getting resources, maybe on the technology side, to help us kind of stay current. So, what do you guys have, or what do you recommend in that area?
Yeah, so yeah, it's super important for non-tech people to be able to make appropriate changes and configuration changes so that a system works best for you. If everything has to go into a tech queue, and you hope that they can get to it with other priorities before you can react as a business to what's going on in the market, no one wants to be in that position. So for us, it was really important to design our system, Clear Collateral, our underwriting system, to be um, configurable right through the admin tools, right? So whether that's adding new rules that are important to review, or whether it's changing your risk tiers so that the right files are going to the right level of underwriter in terms of training or seniority, however you have it set up. So it needs to work for your business and your workflow on the fly without having to put in a tech request and hope that they get to it.
Honestly, I think what you just said is so important because we are competing, to get through so many of our different initiatives. So having something that is much more easily handled by the business without relying on having to go through the tech side is really critical. And then tell me a little bit. I mean, obviously, there's not going to be any shortage of regulatory auditing coming at us. And so tell me a little bit about what that could look like.
Yeah, I mean, for some folks, the idea of all that power, right, changing a system on the fly is like, well, that has to also be met with robust logging, audit capability, and all of that. So for us, it starts with, of course, every change being logged, but also when it comes to the actual review of the appraisal itself, capturing all of the information that was being considered, capturing all the notes on every section, and how different rule failures or conditions were met, were resolved. All that should be captured in the system and easily reported. And I've seen a lot of folks that have just checklists that are outside the system and are working through a checklist that's not part of the process. We felt it was important to bring those things together, to make sure that the checklist is part of the actual review, and that the information is captured and easily reportable.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that definitely ties in with our last topic, and that's talking about appraisal bias detection. And we know this is something that's been in the news lately, and so what can lenders do with this? Because this is right now this is such a new topic, and how you address it and how you get ahead of it. What can lenders do in that area?
Yeah, so we're going from, obviously talking about overvaluation risk and concerns around that. And then there's also undervaluation concerns as well, especially, from what we've seen, for refis, there's a lot of concern from the public about, potentially undervaluation. So in both those cases, I think, first of all, having, at the heart of any system, having accurate analytics that really provide another checkpoint to understand, is this value making sense, right? Is it making sense, uh, both with the property and also what's happening in the surrounding market? So you have to bring all that market data into the same place. You have to have accurate analytics, an accurate AVM, if you will, at the heart of it, and then rules to let you know, where is this value lying? Is it at the high end of the scale, the low end of the scale? What's the risk of of uh, of what's happening based on how far it is away from the analytics? That's that's the start, right? And I think that that's regardless of where there's specific concerns around appraisal bias. First of all, you need to know, where are you at from a value standpoint and accuracy standpoint. But then I think, again, there's specific rules and specific things. It could be everything from keyword searches, right? Looking at the language being used in the report. That all should be automated, in a way that you can ensure that there's compliance and ensure that there's nothing that needs a deeper dive. But I think, like, we're all struggling to get a clear understanding of which files need more scrutiny, and having a system that's flexible and able to adapt to changing concerns is important.
I like that you mentioned the use of data because I always say this: numbers don't lie. And it's really tough because these days, anytime, even a big passion of mine is the reconsideration process. So even
Mm.
when maybe you do have some data and maybe you do want to go take it back to the original appraiser, I'm not sure, but often the original appraiser doesn't want to be questioned, and they don't want to change the value that they've assigned. So tell me a little bit more about what does that reconsideration process look like, maybe with the future, or with some of these tools that are available?
Yeah, so certainly, the ability to escalate, right? And, after, someone raising their hand, doing initial review, but the ability to then, send that to the right level of a staff appraiser, or whatever your escalation process looks like as a lender. That's important, first of all, is getting the right eyes on it as it works through the process. But then also, again, um, it's building your case and making sure that, not only do you have a good understanding of the internals of a report, recent market data, looking at the same thing that was on the market at the time of the appraisal, going back to that piece, and then being able to manage that communication as well back to the appraiser right within the platform. So that's all part of making that process maybe efficient, but also ensuring that you have a robust understanding of what's going on and you can have your case.
Yeah, I know we've maybe only got a little bit of time left here, and I know that we've talked about maybe bifurcating that process, having a different collateral underwrite versus credit underwrite. And I know it sounds like Clear Capital has some amazing tools out there available to us to consider. How, if there was, if there were lenders or others that wanted to reach out to you, what is the recommended way? How would you prefer to be contacted?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm always excited to talk about these issues and challenges within the market. So you can always reach out, to me on LinkedIn, or also Kenon.Chen@clearcapital.com. But you can also reach out to our team, and just sales@clearcapital.com if you want to learn more about the platform and how it's helped other people.
Fantastic. Kenon, I truly have enjoyed our conversation, and I know that there are probably several out there in our next community that are really interested in talking more with you about the tools that you have to offer. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Really appreciate it. It was fun.